Hey, it's Tom. Today we're going to look at creating a stereoscopic panoramic image rendered out from Corona for VR purposes. It's actually very simple to set up. First step is to take your camera and add the Corona camera mod here. Two steps once we've got that. We click on override, leave that set to the default of spherical, and we click on the spherical VR mod to enable it. That's new in Corona 1.4. We're going to leave everything set to the defaults for now. I'll take a quick look at those settings later. And then with that done, there's only one last step before we can hit the render button. We want to adjust our output size, change that to custom, and you want to set an image aspect of 1 and lock it. This will give you a completely square image. It'll be an over-under image with a top and bottom version of the scene rendered for the different eyes. And of course, each individual image for each eye will actually be twice as long as it is tall, since it's occupying only half the height of the square. So each eye will have an image in that aspect ratio, but the overall image will be square. For image sizes, because in VR you're effectively going to need quite a lot of pixels because you're effectively viewing it very close up on your VR device, you'll find that I think 4000 is a good default for testing, and perhaps 6000 or 8000 is good for final quality. For the demo, I'm just going to leave it to 4000. And that's really all there is to it. I'm going to hit render, and I will leave that creating an image. I'm only doing 5 passes simply for this tutorial. And when I come back, as well as looking at the result, we'll have a look at those other options in the spherical VR mod, and we'll also take a look at some artistic considerations in setting up the scene for use in VR. I'll be right back. So here we are with the rendering complete. Everything as we would expect. We have a square image. The image for each eye is twice as long as it is tall, and it's all ready to go. All you need to do is save as a JPEG, and then you can load that into whichever VR application that you choose, as long as it supports the stacked left-right eye format. There are quite a lot out there. As an example, Oculus 360 photos on the Gear VR will work. There's an app called VR Player on Google Cardboard. It will work, and it's just a matter of the app accepting the over-under style of image. Okay, as promised, let's have a quick look at some practical considerations when setting up a scene for rendering in VR. First thing to keep in mind is that your camera should be absolutely level. Bear in mind that the viewer can look up and down for themselves once in the scene, so the usual questions of composition where you may angle the camera, no longer relevant. Keep the camera completely level for an optimal experience for the viewer. Next aspect is to give some additional thought to the camera location. You'll notice here that in this scene my camera is right next to this wall, and you can see that in the way the image is done. So if I turn around as a viewer in the VR app, I will find myself nose to nose, my nose placed against this wall. So we don't actually want that. For a proper setup, we should keep the camera away from any object. And again, this will rethink, you'll need to rethink composition, because normally in a 2D scene I might be saying, well, now I can't see the TV set, and the bottom of this furniture has been cut off compared to my previous composition. But of course, in a VR app, the viewer can look left and right and up and down entirely for themselves. I don't need to be concerned with that. But I do need to be concerned with the camera not being inside an object. We don't want it placed so that if I look down I appear to be standing inside a chair or a table. and we don't want it so that if I turn around I'll find myself face to face with a wall. So do rethink your compositions with that in mind. Now, talking of how close an object is, you really don't want anything closer than about a meter. Once things get to half a meter away from the camera, there will be a cross-eyed effect for the viewer, and it's very much the same as if you hold your fingers too close to your eyes. In the real world, you'll start to see a split image. You'll see two versions of your fingers or any other object, because it's simply the two separate images from the eyes cannot be recombined into one. So the recommended distance for comfortable viewing is about 2.5 meters away. Anything that you're expecting the viewer to focus on for any length of time. You'll find that the cross-eyed effect starts to kick in somewhere about half a meter to a meter. And you'll want to avoid that because it's an unpleasant experience for the viewer. That takes us into having a look at the other settings, and I'll explore those just now. So to take a look at some of these other settings, I have changed my scene. We have a free car model, and free trees, and an HDRI background from HDRI Skies. And this is the kind of scenario where you will need to adjust the settings. That's basically a car interior, something where the objects are going to be much closer than in a normal room. Anything here like the steering wheel and the dashboard, we're getting into that sort of half a meter to a meter range where things can be problematic with the default settings. And let me just switch across to Photoshop, where I've rendered it a couple of times. Here we are with the default, because it's kind of hard to demonstrate this without actually being inside the VR app, but what I've done is taken the output from the various settings I used, and I have overlaid the two different images for each eye on top of each other. So this is the default setting, and we can see with it overlaid that the close objects have a big difference when presented to each eye, and this is not going to resolve in when the viewer looks at it. It's going to have that split image effect. So you'll see that all these close objects have this big difference. When we get to the tree, we have a very reasonable difference, and when we get to the clouds, there's no difference at all. They're infinitely far away. If I flip the images on and off, you can see that the background to the environment doesn't change at all. So the first thing I tried was to change the focal distance. I left the eye separation for this one at 63, and focal distance I moved to 567 millimeters, about half a meter, and I took that by measuring the distance from the camera to the steering wheel. And we can see now that objects at that range are now overlapped almost completely. If I flip that on and off, you can see the steering wheel doesn't show much change at all. The dash and mirrors show a bit of a change, but you'll notice that our background environment now shows a big difference, and it's going to start to demonstrate the split image effect for the viewer. You'll also notice that the reflection of the sky here in the mirror, let me just bring this opacity up to 100, and if we flip back and forth, notice that the reflection changes a lot. Even though the position of the actual wing mirror doesn't, the effective distance is what counts for anything that shows up in a reflection. So since it's the environment that's being reflected, it's going to show the same difference as viewing the environment directly. So keep that in mind with reflections and refractions. Now I will note that reducing this, if you're in an interior scene with no exterior view, You could set this to the distance from the camera to the furthest wall or object, and that would work very effectively. Like we've seen here in our Photoshop, anything at that focal distance pretty much doesn't move at all. So what you'll be doing though is making the furthest object the wall or furthest object pretty much lined up, and the nearer objects will have more difference in the images to the left and right eye. So for a completely enclosed interior scene with no visible exterior, that works pretty good. You probably won't need to do it. Leaving it set to infinity should give perfectly fine results. But if you wanted to just tweak it, that's the kind of tweak you could do. Not good in our case with the external environment, and the same would be true if there was an external environment visible outside of a window. So the next step I did was to leave this to infinity, but to bring eye separation down to 20 millimeters, reducing it by about a third. Now, in effect, what I've done, because this is the distance between the eyes, I have, if you like, shrunk our viewer in the scene down to 1/3 of their size. Or, if you like, conceptually, it's the same as scaling the scene up by 3 times. That means now that objects that are in reality 1/2 meter away are processed as if they're 1.5 meters away. Now, because everything scales evenly, once you're in the VR application, you won't get a sense that you're inside a giant car. It will be exactly the same result as scaling the scene evenly, and because everything is scaled together, there'll be nothing to give a visual cue that things are 3 times the size. The advantage of this, rather than scaling the scene, is of course you can continue to work in real-world units in Max. So over here, let's turn it on. This is our settings here with 20mm eye separation, convergence left to infinity. Now we can see we have some difference here between the left and right eye images for the close objects, but that's okay. Some difference is fine. Because convergence is still at infinity, our HDRI background doesn't move, and this actually gives a very good result. The last step I did was to change my focal distance and change the eye separation. And I flip back over to Photoshop and switch that on. And of course, you can see, as we might have expected, the steering wheel now doesn't really change in the images to the left and right eye, but our background does begin to have some separation again. And that may not be what we want. So I think this setting here, where we've reduced the eye distance to 20, but left convergence at infinity, is probably the best. You'll also see in our reflection here, if I just flip back and forth, not so big a difference there. Now the difference really is as would be expected from the change in the object itself. And that's really the only time that you would need to adjust those settings over in Max. Anything else, the defaults work perfectly fine. It's only when you get into a scene with very confined spaces that you may want to make an adjustment, and my recommended adjustment is eye separation. Bring that down to something like 20 or 30 millimeters, and that will make the scene comfortable to view in the VR application. Other than that, it's generally fine to leave everything exactly as is and just hit the render button. Hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching.